Okay, good evening. Welcome to the most recent version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 10th of February, 2022. And I have the great pleasure to have Iain Leckenby something. I'm sorry, I don't see your name there. To talk about the Digital Covenant, which was an effort to, which is still an effort, a platform, a blockchain platform to collect signatures for in favor of independence. So first of all, Iain, thank you for apologize for not remembering exactly your name, but thank you for being with us.
No, thank you for having us. No, it's absolutely fine. It's one of these unusual ones. When you go to a screen now, you can see it again.
Okay, exactly.
So yeah, no, looking forward to the chat. Yeah, and obviously the whole concept of the digital covenant blockchain democracy, it's something I've been working on and been part of for well over 2 years now. So looking forward to having a bit of a recap, a chat, and ask some proper questions.
I'd like to first go into the original covenant that was signed back in, I think they started signing it in like 1949 or early 50s, and they physically got well over 1 million or was it 2 million signatures? Was it 2 million? It was 2 million, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was born in '87, so it was a few years before I was about. But yeah, I think it came about, was it 1956?
Well, it was earlier. It was earlier.
Yeah, close to that 2 or 3 million signatures.
Yeah,
no, it was all bullshit.
I think it was submitted in 1953. It was earlier than that, as I understand. And then maybe Paul, if you could check that and put it up on the chat so we can. But anyway, it was, they physically went all around the country, got I think over 2 million signatures, which was a significant portion of the population. And they, saying that basically that they wanted a different constitutional arrangement. And they sent it to Westminster, and then nothing happened. I mean, that's kind of typical. But it served as the inspiration for our mutual friend Peter, who developed the digital covenant and based on blockchain. Now, I'll start it off, but you can certainly help me. Now, as I understand blockchain, or as what is called, distributed ledger
digital covenant.
No, but the DLT
ledger technology,
ledger technology, and sorry, it's been a while since I thought about it. But in any case, it's basically that there's the blockchain is based on the idea that you have a block, and then kind of in the computer where you can put it down any information, saying a signature for independence, for example. And then that is encrypted to a very high degree, where I've got my, my encryption number on the digital covenant, which is like, I don't know, 24 letters, numbers. I don't know. I mean, very, almost, absolutely impossible to hack. And it can't be hacked because any attempt to hack would be known by all of the different blocks within the chain. I mean, that's my kind of layman's untechnical understanding of it. But if you could elaborate them hopefully in layman's terms, so that our readers and myself can better understand it, and I can have a kind of refresher course on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the blockchain democracy is a concept, and it still is just a concept at the moment. It's very rarely used in political systems today. The only kind of real example would be to look at Estonia. Now, they conceptualized their blockchain way back, I think it was as early as 1998. So it was before Google was even a thing, and we had internet, and we had the data resourcing powers that we have today. But in a nutshell, the way that Estonia run their system is it's an interactive polling. So if something's going up through their government, the people that are registered on the blockchain, which is every citizen, is able to partake in the vote.
Just very quickly, I wasn't, from what I understood, Estonia it's very, digitally, a lot of digital governance, but I'm not sure that it was blockchain. I'm not sure that blockchain has been fully integrated. Yes, it's very.
Yeah, it was more like a digitized democracy. But it's how they run their social care systems. It's how they run their polling. It's layered in, and there's so many different ways that you can take any digital blockchain of that extent. It's kind of maybe easier to describe a digital currency, which could once again be a bit of an eye opener for the listeners and viewers tonight. it's the same kind of encryption level. You're talking about 32 or 16-bit encryption. So that's that unique number you were on about, where it's a mixture of letters and numbers. That's your verification of the signature.
Yeah.
Now that verification is approved by the core team who look at the two forms of ID that we view as acceptable. Now, as it stands at the moment, when it was 2019, when the Digital Covenant came out, they were going with driver's licenses, passports, birth certificates, council tax bills,
and proof of residency as well. So you needed the two documents. And I remember because
that then basically verified that the person that had signed that was living and working in part of Scotland. Now, the process can also be signed by international viewers. So I know on Independence Live here we get viewers from Australia and America and everywhere else in between. So they can sign the blockchain, but they don't sign it into the same encryption level. So these blockchain aspects and concepts, the simple aspect of it is the two forms of ID are verified. Once that we know that's a real person, they're committed to the blockchain. Now that's when gassing comes in, and this is where it kind of then starts to balance in with more.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because I know we I was part of the 4-member core team with Peter and a couple others that, I wasn't a technical advisor, but I was, I participated in the decisions and the development and gave my view on different things as our friend Peter was the kind of the spearhead of the technical development. But and as you correctly stated, we separated. I was the first international signator to get my but it was based on Ethereum. And we designed it. I mean, I talked to our friend Derek, who also was heavily involved in, Peter and Derek are basically the main, brains and, behind it. And so we were able to, so they developed the basic blockchain platform for it. And we intentionally wanted to keep the price very low so that the transaction cost would be low. But as the price rose of Ethereum, that meant that they kind of stuck the digital covenant. So at last I looked, it's been a few months, maybe something's changed, but it was stuck at about, so there were several thousand submissions and approved submissions, but there were only like 500 and something committed to the blockchain because the price was high. So of Ethereum. So help walk us through that a bit. I mean, how the technology works and why it would be stuck in that way, and not, because we wanted to get like 2 million signatures quickly. But
well, I need to be careful in the way that I terminologize this, because I'm going to try and compare it to stock exchanges and stock markets. That's effectively what's happened with the crypto. So you got to be careful when you're talking about insider trading. So like, oh, I know Microsoft are about to do this deal, so I'm going to put all my shares in Microsoft and it's going to ping up. That's the same with crypto markets. So, and it's the price of Bitcoin. I mean, we can track that back to October last year at its peak, when it was late October, early November. It was up at trading at $47,000 per Bitcoin. It's now dropped back down to about, when I looked at it yesterday, 31,500. That could have shifted 1,000 either way in that time frame. So that was effectively part of the issue with putting more signatures onto it, because when it was first conceptualized, Ethereum was trading at, I think it was something ridiculous, like 8 to 12 pence per signature. So for every 100 people you signed, it was costing £10.
Yeah.
When I was doing the Long Walk to Freedom, because that's a question I came up with.
You were on that. You were on that. Okay.
And he was explaining at that point the signature price had gone up to about £7 or £8 per signature. So it was like, we need to kind of, and it's a case of like either, because at the moment and this is why the blockchain democracy is really exciting, because it's a plan B for everything. It's also a plan B for currency. That's effectively built into it. The problem with the blockchain as a democratic process and as a people's assembly and all these exciting things it could become, there's frameworks built into it that those trigger points don't happen until there's 1 million signatures, until there's 2.3 million, I believe, was the overall decided number.
That's what we wanted to achieve.
It's the overall share. Yeah. Between the kind of the yes and no votes and people democratically involved, there's lots of things that need to be worked out in it. And it's, as you'll be aware from the very start, that this concept was initially handed to the S1.EP in a platter to say,
I know.
This is what we've come up with. This is what we want to do.
I know.
Are you
I was part
interested?
of that.
I remember watching one of your shows where you had an S1.EP. I think it had it sitting on his desk for a long time and just went, it'll never work.
Well, basically,
and the reason
one of our colleague, one of the members of the core team was basically who knew very well Mike Russell, and we presented that to him, and we actually had a meeting with him, and it was more that was more about the Constitution that I had drafted, and then we began to develop it more after this idea of the Constitution, and I met certain members of the civil service and explained it to them, what in terms of the Constitution. But then we collectively decided to, add blockchain elements to the, to this constitutional development framework, so that as the Constitution was developed, people could have their input, people could vote on things, on elements of the Constitution, should the rights be, all of that. And basically the people that we sent it to in the Scottish government were kind of hostile to it. They were they were getting crap from the Scottish government was essentially signed by 2 million people and was wound down in the early 1950s. Yes, that was my impression.
Thank you, Hasbury Stubble.
Yeah, but
yeah, you're 100% Mark. Right, Mark. I think the problem that the governments have with blockchain is the same issue they have with blockchain democracy and blockchain currency. The governments aren't keen on blockchain currencies because it means that me and you, Mark, can exchange product and information between each other, and bitcoins and all these exchange of products and services without having the governments and central banks involved, and that scares the living daylights out of them. And it's the same with talking about it's all, once again, this is just my vision. When I was doing this walk and having the conversations on the ground, when you were explaining, we're walking for Scottish independence, a lot of people were very turned on by that idea. A lot of them were just like, nah, I don't want to speak to you anymore. I can't believe you're walking all the way around the country to promote independence. But then when you started having a side talk to them about the digital covenant and having this concept of decentralizing democracy, so bringing things back down to a grassroots level where local people can vote on local issues at all times, and we're not running polling companies to get opinions, we're actually getting a real feel on the ground and a people's assembly. Because when we talk about independence, what kind of independence do we want in Scotland?
No, absolutely.
Now I want one that's got a written constitution.
Absolutely, in my view, the Constitution that I wrote, was very much a framework. It was, and it had and I can send you the link. We'll hopefully have it back on our Scott SSRG site soon, that people can put input to it. But basically, that for example, the U.S. Constitution, it was written in 1789 and 87, and it's been pretty much the same since. It's ossified, it's complete, and the government has become even more corrupt, over the years. But we can't change anything. I mean, you can't even change the electoral college system, where a minority. Where a candidate who gets a minority of the votes for presidency could still win, which is just insane. But you can't change it because it's in this ossified constitution. Why not have an updatable constitution where the Constitution is like the operating system and the laws are like the applications, and that individual people like Wikipedia almost can say, hey, what about this? Why don't you change this wording here? Because I was looking, our friend Peter gave me a list of all of the links to all of the laws passed by Westminster since the year 1432 or something like that, all the way through, and then also the Holyrood laws that have been passed since since 1999, and the old Scots laws as well. And that's the corpus of law that exists. And I mean, it's got ridiculous laws in there. I mean, the Bugger the Jocks Act of 532. I mean, just ridiculous laws. And why not simplify the legal system, put it all online, easily understood, and anybody that has notices something in the law. Wait, what about this? Well, maybe you could word it a little differently so that people can understand clearly, where you can fine tune the law and you can fine tune the Constitution, and the people can do that, and just people who are intelligent, can do that, can suggest changes, and then that can be voted on and, developed organically through the blockchain, rather than, this ridiculous, Scotland, the UK doesn't have a written constitution. They make it up as they go along. And the legal system is just laughably ludicrous and archaic. So, and I think that, blockchain democracy offers a possibility of completely reforming and, truly making it democracy, because in my view, and I'm sure you'll agree, what kind of independence does Scotland want and need? And in the case of the US, they got independence from the UK, and, in 1776, they fought a war. They finally got the British the hell out of there. And in 1781, and had the Articles of Confederation in 1783. That was roughly, and then there was an event called Shays Rebellion, where a bunch of farmers in Massachusetts got really pissed off at the local government and went in there with their pitchforks and guns and, blocked it and stopped. And then the elites were spooked. George Washington, Madison, all that. They were like, oh shit, we're the elites, and, we're the landowners, and we want to be able to keep dominating the thing. So we better write this Constitution, which they did and had it ratified. But it was very much an elite constitution. And the idea, and, there are, proposals for, interim constitutions that are just basically mini Westminster constitutions. And I think we need to get as far away from that as possible. Sorry, I was going off on a tangent. I've been teaching this to my students for the last few days, so it's buzzing around in my head. But
listen, there's nothing better than a free education lesson from a professor. If anything, that's my problem. I'm not spending enough time listening to professors. Try to adapt that in the last 2-3 years to my own personal learning. And this is, I think, what is key about the Indie Live network is we do cover a lot of different subjects, topics, and it all kind of resonates back into independence. And it's,
exactly.
It's what does the digital covenant actually do? Well, at the moment, it's just a database of signatures. What it can become is the People's Assembly. It can become that chamber that holds our electeds awards to account. We can integrate it with healthcare systems, so we can do data resource sharing across the nation to see where trends and diets are going, to see where and I say take away this postcode lottery, but ironically, it's becoming even more of a postcode lottery because you're getting more specific with your data gathering. But that data gathering could be, the local council putting in a decision about a road planning application here in East Kilbride or where you are. It could be any matter of change and allow.
I know. This is bringing me back because I haven't thought of in these terms for a few years. But yeah, you could, for example, you could have referendums in specific neighborhoods, like, I don't know, Govan. Yeah. And people who, what do we do with this plot of land? What do we do with this derelict building? And you could have a local referendum, proposing this, proposing that, and have real local democracy.
Because what that blockchain system would allow is everyone that's got a key stake interest in that, local government, the private business, the individuals living in the area, they would all be able to submit their information to it, and that would allow those people within that mini blockchain of that mini referendum to get as much detailed information, not the biased stuff we see in the BBC, not the weighted stuff that comes out my own mouth, but an actual true reflection of what is that community saying in that area at that time. And that's key to all of this. It's I don't know if it's something that because this is more like kind of the work that I've done in the past that with businesses and business plans. Have you heard of the Kaizen business model?
No.
Well, what Kaizen effectively does, it was implemented in Japanese culture. And it effectively takes a pyramid of your typical CEO, your board of directors, your regional managers, your staff and your customers.
Corporate hierarchy, right, yeah.
Yeah, you flip that pyramid upside down. So now your citizens and your customers and your frontline workers are now at the top of the pyramid. CEO sits right at the bottom, head of state. You can put all the information down the pyramid. So the person that's actually in charge has as much resource to make the right decisions as possible. Because you try bringing a local issue in a local area in here at the top end, it's got to go through so much middle management before something
I
actually
know,
gets done.
and there's so many blocks along the way. You talk to one bureaucrat, they're not interested, they don't like it, it dies. It's like so many, I mean, like so many systems. I mean, especially the United States and definitely the UK. I'm trying to decide whether the UK or the US political system is worse, but they're both really bad. And there's no question that Scotland can do better. And but until there are the full powers and that Scotland can create its own political system, it's not going to happen, And so independence has to, but in my view, also nothing prevents us from designing this now, and what I'm concerned about is that, we're waiting around for Nicola Sturgeon to, beg Boris Johnson for a Section 30 order. He's not going to give it. And they're saying like, oh yeah, we've got, we've got, civil servants planning. It's like, what's their competence? They're UK civil servants. They're not Scottish civil servants. And so what kind of country, what kind of Scotland would they design or do that? And that it's, deeply worrying, and that in my view, and I'm sure you share this view, if Scotland becomes independent and then it's just another mini Westminster, it would be just a complete waste, and there has to be citizens involvement. There has to be, genuine democratic involvement. And it would be a first in the world, really, that you can build a government, a state from scratch using, because there's not much there right now. I mean, there's the Scottish government. It's basically an appendage of the Westminster system. It's basically the UK civil service, which is administering Scotland with an elected body that sort of is, right. But any law that they pass has to get royal assent, so has to go through the Westminster system in order to be approved. And screw that. Let's have a real democratic, system where everybody can contribute to the development of the Constitution, the perpetual development of the Constitution. I've made this joke before that, the United States, it's like, the Constitution, it's like running on, Windows 1789 for 300 years. So anyway, what are your...
Listen, I mean, because you mentioned obviously the work that you've done within the SSRG group. I've spoken to the likes of David Hendry that's come through that, and lots of other names. But I think that's the kind of the key point in it is there's today active live that you can access on the internet, maybe 4 or 5 copies or written constitutions that could be implemented into independent Scotland.
Sure.
And it should be for the Scottish people to decide, well, yeah, I like that bit of that, so I'm going to copy paste that into it. I mean, we've all got different issues that we want to campaign on. I mean, for example, when I did the Long Walk to Freedom, I started as an SNP party member.
Yeah.
Left the SNP during the walk because while doing the walk, I was talking about the default voting system that we're going to be coming up with in that May 2021 election. And the simple point is that mathematics doesn't add up to doing SNP 1 and 2. We need to look at ways to max the yes vote, and that would have been by splitting our vote between the region, well, not the regions, because that's your list vote element, which is where Alba stood, and you have your your constituency, and that's where obviously the SNP stood and won vast majority of their seats. But because the SNP do so well in the constituencies in Scotland now, it goes out in the list seats automatically, and you're getting your backdoor list MSPs that usually come in from a true unionists.
In the last election, they got 2 list seats and millions of votes. I mean, so many, votes that could have, if the SNP had said in the last election, yes, please vote for Alba. Sturgeon and Salmon had their differences, but more important is independence. So yeah, if the SNP had said yes, vote Alba, they could have had a majority of 80 or 90. But
this is why I come back to that whole pyramid of Kaizen, because we're back to the root cause of the problem. Nicola Sturgeon at the top, the Alex Salmon. We're talking about individuals. The sovereignty of Scotland is not dictated to by individuals; it's the people of Scotland. So when we put ourselves at the top of that pyramid,
the problem is it is now. Scots have sovereignty from the Declaration on Growth, the claim of right that's been reaffirmed several times, but it's not actionable sovereignty at this point. If it was, then we could, they could, Scots could just leave. And so legally it exists, but but it's very difficult. the Scottish sovereignty is they have no mechanism to act upon it at this point. So again, it's latent, in my view. It's there, but it doesn't have the mechanism to act. And I think that the digital covenant and blockchain democracy could make it much more real than it ever could have been in the past. So.
Yeah, I agree. Because when you talk about sovereignty, you're talking about parliamentary sovereignty. Are we talking about the sovereignty of the head of state? Are we talking about the sovereignty of the English people compared to the Scottish people? And that's when you go back to history, into the Declaration of Arbroath. And I mean, that was a very interesting piece of legislation to put through at that time to the Pope of the day, because it was the Pope that effectively decided on who was sovereign, because it made, when you were dealing with kings and kingdoms across the Christian lands, it was very much easier to make one person the point of contact. Making the whole population the point of contact to God was a bit of a, how do we do this? But they did it, and it's there. And I think they you'll be able to, so a lot more about constitutions than I do. But there was a lot of reference to the Declaration of Arbroath written into the US Constitution. Very much from the kind of framework.
It was more the Declaration of Independence than the Constitution. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'd like to shift, and have the second part of our discussion dominate. Let's see. I just want to do a little house cleaning. Iain, how is the digital covenant coming? I have another 3 people who would be willing to sign it. I don't know what the status is, of it. I know that some people, the fact that you have, when you do sign, you have to put up your passport, or a form of identity and a proof of residency. And I know that the administrators have been quite rigorous on that, because they want it to have full 100% integrity, and some people have been kind of put off by it. It's digitalcovenant.scot, right? That is the address.
The best domain to get in to sign it is Sign.digitalcovenant.scot, the one that's on the screen at the moment. Yes, if you want to keep an eye on how the digital covenant's getting on, you replace the word sign with data.digitalcovenant.scot. A lot of the other websites associated to it are down because of cost, because of the cost of running it's a lot more expensive to run a .scot domain than it is a .com domain. So there's a whole much, and that's why, and this is the problem when you go from the very top of the spectrum to the government's having a look at this, and then you take it to the grassroots. Whenever we work on grassroots projects, money and budgets are always the key issues. Yeah. So somewhere where we're putting it potentially into the education system, so give it to all the universities in Scotland for all of them to work on and process and manage it. Because, as I said, the digital covenant at the moment is simply a database. It's a database of signed, verified people that are committed to this whole concept and want to see the movement carry it forward. If anything, it needs a bit of a rebrand, because I believe that we go back to what kind of independence do we want in Scotland. I want everybody to be involved in blockchain democracy. I don't want just nationalists and unionists. I want both of those groups in there, because it's important that we take everyone with us, and you've got to cover the age groups as well. So you're talking about your people in your 60s, 70s, 80s that don't know how to get onto a Zoom call, or don't know how to log up an email address, or don't know how to Google something. There is a large percentage of the population that have no concept of that. You try and say to them that you're going to be voting on this way, it could be used like a proxy vote. But I think the important thing about the Scottish Government, when they ran their test, they talk about clear poll.
Yeah, but I think they're old, and they won't necessarily be here for much longer. Well, they won't. Not to be morbid, but the younger generation is so much more attuned to this, and the idea of very quickly, I just wanted to address one thing before we move on to what are the possibilities of digital democracy. One of the comments I saw: we need a written constitution. I have developed one. Elliot Bulmer and John Drummond at the Constitutional Commission have an interim constitution. There are, I believe, Grouspeter has written one. A constitution for Scotland, if I got this right. So there's at least 4 that have been developed, and at the SSRG we're currently working on trying to get a constitutional convention together, hopefully to next August, to decide how to become independent and how to move forward with kind of combining the best elements of all of these different drafts into something that. But in my view, a key aspect of that would be to have something that's a constitution that's fine-tunable over the long term. Again, it's like running on the same, it's like running on 20-year-old software. If you can't update the operating system or the applications, you're just stuck. And so, and that's the way I see, digital governance, as being able to be constantly updatable, constantly modifiable. And I mean, to start with, so at this point, I'd like to begin a conversation with what can be done with digital democracy. I know that we can begin with 100% integrity of the voting process. That when people vote, you can vote. Nobody can see how you voted, so it's even more secure than people putting a piece of paper in a box, and which is some I don't know, 16th century technology. I don't know. I mean, I don't know when they started voting or whatever. But certainly that when voting sort of became relatively common, and maybe in the 1830s or 1840s in England and the U.S., then they were just putting pieces of paper in a box, because they wanted to be a secret ballot. This can be a secret ballot, and you can go and this enables just to start with, for voting, that people can vote. They can see all of the other votes. They don't know who voted how, and they can also verify that their vote was counted accurately. For starters, I mean, just as the just as the basis for a blockchain democracy. And do you see it that way? And what are the other possibilities if we were to build a constitution using blockchain technology and for mass input into the way that Scotland is built and created and constantly updated? I started with voting, but what are some of the other things that can be done if we were able to implement a truly modern digital democracy where people could develop the constitution, develop the laws, and these types of things? So what are the other possibilities? I think you alluded to a few of them before.
Well, I mean, sticking on the voting for half a second, if I think back to movements in the past, like the suffragettes movement here in the UK, where it was, that was to get women to vote, and that was way back at the turn of the century. People that were originally able to vote when these processes first began, they had to be homeowners, landowners. They needed to be men. So it's, you go to Australia, and dependent, there's lots of different areas where racism is also kicked into an element where you can't vote based on the colour of your skin. So, today we're at a stage where the vote is open to many more people than it was any point in the last 50, 100 years. But you talk about the Conservatives bringing forward voter ID at the polling booths.
Got it straight from the state. They got it straight from the states. I mean, I know all about. I mean, I teach this stuff. The history of voting rights, I'm very well aware of, and it's expanded. It's it's expanded over time. It probably reached its peak in terms of participation maybe in the 70s or 80s. And then the states, which control the voting process, have been able to retract it and making it much more a pain in the ass to vote, purging the rolls, all that. And that's just
and that's just to alienate a group of voters that you don't want, and that's exactly. When it comes into party politics. The digital covenant would offer a safe, secure system where, as you've explained, that person can be verified. They can't cheat the system. As I said, it flashes back to, there's loads of great resources out there on what Estonia is doing on it. But then if I talk about kind of how Estonia also use their digitized democracy, they use it as their social care system. Now, we're living in a day and age at the moment where people are going to be choosing in the next few weeks between heating and eating. And we're not talking about people that are on the universal credit gravy train. We're talking about individuals that have got 2 kids, 2 household incomes that are not going to be able to afford. Throw into that the crippling increases into the mortgage rates, and we've got a disaster on our hands. Now, what a blockchain democracy, if this was in place now, what you'd actually be able to do is integrated fully with the social care system, so we can have services free at point of need. So if I've got a card or a mobile phone that's got my blockchain assembly member on it, where I can take part in my voting, and this has happened here, this has happened nationally, this is what I want to get involved in. If I go to my gas meter or my shop, I could potentially buy my shopping through it and literally put it in, ping it against there, and it's like, yeah, you've got money in your bank account, Ian, we're going to debit all that money towards your food shop. Or it could come back saying, well, you've not got enough, so we'll charge you for the alcohol, we'll charge you for the tobacco, but the bread, the milk, the electricity, the gas that you've just bought here, that's, there's always, we do it travelling on a bus. I think, and a flashback, because obviously I've done a lot of work with Independence Live, covering a lot of events. Glasgow, you're always around. It could be sometimes in Glasgow when you're going to 2 or 3 different places. But I remember jumping on a bus one time, I take out my bank card, one of these contactless ones, bing, getting my one-way bus, didn't ping. And it was because I'd maybe used the card contactless 10 times, so it needed a PIN confirmation, bus didn't offer that infrastructure. Driver just gives you the thumb, jump on the bus, no problems.
Yeah.
Next stop along, 2 kids try to get on the bus, door opens, lassie must have been about 12 or 13, says to the bus driver, I don't have any change, I need to get home, I'm going that way. Bus driver shut the door and drove off. Now, he didn't do that because he wasn't being inhuman. He did that because he's been trained on KPI management, and if someone's on my bus that doesn't have a bus ticket, I can lose my job. I can be deducted it.
Yeah.
Blockchain could effectively allow for that. You're not then having to discriminate someone. If there's a train that's running, if there's a bus that's running, a human being should be able to get onto it. We should be growing up in a country, Scotland, where we're one of the top 19 on the ONS energy producing nations on the planet, and we've got more food banks here than we have McDonald's.
Yeah, just my own personal observations about Scotland. I spent in 91 and 92. I spent the summers there, and I remember I lived in a little a kind of a student apartment on Curzlan Street, next to the University of Glasgow, and you had the if you needed hot water, you had to put a coin in the little machine and turn it, and it would give you 5 minutes of hot water, something like that, or gas for cooking, and I'm just like, what? Coming from the United States, you got a bill every month, but but you can only imagine, in retrospect, it's always, everything's done in Scotland to make just people just grind them down. Oh my God, I don't have a fucking 50, pence thing to put in a machine to get gas or whatever, and then you can't get it, and so you have to scrounge, or the thing of with gas where you have to get a card filled and then you can use your water heater, stuff like that. It's just, I know there's different options for it, but I just noticed the way that, I don't know, that life in Scotland, particularly Glasgow, where I have the most experience. It's just, just the whole thing that you have to put a coin in to get water. I even understand that with televisions it was like that as well. And it's just so, it must be just so draining, especially for poor people, just you have to spend so much time getting coins to put in the machine to heat your water. It's, if you could speak to that and how maybe, with blockchain that could be, with true blockchain democracy, that could be different.
Aye, well, I think I'm now going a kind of a bit off tangent from blockchain and more thinking about manifesto policies that I've written myself.
That's what this is drafted.
But yeah, I think an easy solution to things like that is universal basic income. Where we don't have to. You have so much in state aid that goes towards your housing costs, and that way everyone's guaranteed a roof above their heads. You do the same with the energy, electricity, gas. You do the same with foods. You give people a basic. In standard, you're a citizen of Scotland, this is your entitlement as a human being. If we start from that level, then the sky's the limit. And I think we need to change the definition of work as well, because we talk about paid work, we talk about community work, we talk about activism work, we talk about working to the grave. It's I don't ever want to stop working. I want to keep doing what I do to the day I drop dead. But I don't want to be forced into that and am I going to be able to afford my mortgage next month? Can I put food in the day? That's where you're having some sort of universal basic income would cover that. Now that's something that's my opinion. There's been loads. I think it was Elon Musk that I seen talking about a universal basic wage, because automation is coming in. We're sitting here with this live TV studio set up that if the BBC were doing it 25 years ago, we'd have to have 25 staff in the background, and there's just 3 of us here. Well, unless you're discounting MI5 and that. I get one of the questions that come up with the security of blockchain. Aye, they're everywhere. They're always about. That's why you have VPNs. That's why you look after your data protection. I mean, I always say, like, I do a lot of coaching in different bits and bobs in different markets, but the best way to protect your own identity is to take ownership of it. So that's where you could then kind of tie in, well, blockchain democracy, you're asking for 2 forms of ID. How do I know that's safe? How do I know that's secure? It's been in place for 3 years and it's never been hacked. They've had requests sent through to try and harvest data. That information isn't stored online. It's turned into digitalized numbers that are then stored offline that can't be accessed. So, and that's how you update these things in databases. It's all about back office security. But a virtual private network is if I'm logging into an online bank, I'll switch my VPN on first, because screen capture technology exists today. So they could watch voice technology capture exists today. So there's all sorts of different levels that you need to protect your own house. But yeah, the 77 Brigade MI5, they've got no access to the Digital Covenant, and they've got no access to you if you go and download a VPN. If the show was sponsored by one, it'd be great now, and I would be able to say one of the sponsored names, but I don't even think there's a VPN provider in Scotland. I think it's all that kind of stuff comes from America, like Nord and all these different companies. So, but this is where the blockchain could work in a really good way, because you could start having Scottish brands and businesses picked up and recognise that it can be, as explained before, a backup currency. So, because that when we talk about independence, the biggest kilts that they had over us back in the day was access to the EU. Well, that's already gone, and also the currency. What will we use? Because George Osborne says we're not going to be able to use the pound, which is a load of nonsense. You can use whatever you want. You can pull out your wallet and pull out. It's down to the individual, the banks, the print. Need a central bank, but that's not something you would build into a blockchain democracy. That's something you build into independent Scotland that can hold the central currency. But there's nothing to say that the central currency couldn't be backed on the gold standard or the silver standard or the oil standard or the digital standard. It would be, this is, as I said, why I'm saying put it back to the universities now. Let them actually come up with a blueprint of how the digital assembly will work, how it looks. It shouldn't be individuals. It shouldn't be named coders that me and you know and not that person knows, because you then bring up, I mean, when we talk about track and trace, the 36 billion that the UK spent on that, I've been walking around with a QR code in my arm, coded by Derek. We played it here at Independence Live from back in the day. Yeah. And he offered that software for free, and that still works to this day. I've got one for my house, I've got one for my business, and if I'm meeting another human being now, I'll say, listen, do you want to check in with us? That way, if I get COVID in a week or two, I can let you know. And I'm not letting the NHS know for them to try and track it back all the way through. I can let them know. And that's decentralization. That's me holding that data. That data's secure until I need to access it. Then I can get your phone number. If you've left the right one, I can send you a wee text to say that I caught the sea. Stay away from, well, I say stay away from friends and family for 7 to 10 days, but I think the Tories are getting rid of these mandatory self-isolation periods. So if you've got COVID, they still want you sitting at your desk. And so, yeah, there's so much, and this is why things haven't taken off the way they have, because we're all stalling at the moment with what's happening around the world around us, which is why it's maybe time to have a bit of faith and stick your name in that wee signature box, give the 2 forms of ID, and let's see if we can ramp this up from the 3,000 signatures that have been verified to 30,000 to 300,000. Then they can't ignore us, because then it's we can come as a collective.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that leads me on to my next question is, I mean, having been involved, from the beginning in this Digital Covenant project, there's the barriers we run up against, a lot of skepticism. What are you going to do with our information? We developed a really good Q&A thing, and we tried to assuage the fears. There were other, saying, oh, it's all a fraud, blah, blah, blah. And we asked the Scottish government to embrace it and to encourage people to sign it, but they were hostile to it. From what I was describing before, they were like, they didn't want anything to do with it. And they thought it was just some crackpot, scheme that didn't work. And, I was told by a certain high official that I mentioned earlier, that blockchain was for the birds. They steeped in their kind of colonial mentality, and that they have to ask permission for everything for Westminster, and that the opposition parties are looking at us, and we can't do this, we can't do that. How do we educate the public about it? Aside from what we're doing now, which is obviously relatively limited in scope, but reassure people and demonstrate what the potential is, and even to the extent where it could have been a vehicle for declaring independence. I imagine still can, but we get no traction from the Scottish government. We get hostility from the Scottish government on this. So how do you see those significant barriers be resolved, regardless of their legitimacy?
Not easily. I'm thinking of back in my time when I worked at Sky. We used to have Sky Virgin, the biggest two competitors, and these two companies were spending hundreds of millions a year on adverts, on radios, on billboards, and all they're really doing is taking customers from each other. And the same thing happened with the tobacco industry. Tobacconists and tobacconist companies were spending hundreds of millions each year, not to acquire new customers as such, but to take off of other brands and have this shift. They put a blanket ban on marketing of tobacco products. The only real person that benefited from that was the tobacco industry, because they now were not losing their customers to their next competitor, and they weren't spending hundreds of £1 every year on budget. So that's where you go back to the DC, that we don't have millions of pounds of budget. We don't have hundreds of pounds of budget. You try and spend £7.50 in a grassroots cause and you get questioned for it. That looks like 2 pints of beer you've just bought, sir. Yeah. Or it could be 2 coffees. It could be printing flyers. I mean, one of the flyers I've got, and flashback to the issues with the website, the website's on all the flyers and all the cards I've got is www.digitalcovenant.scot. But that link doesn't work at the moment because we don't have the money to keep the domain name running. Yeah. So it's almost like a cash, because I think there's an option when you sign it. And just to clarify this as well, because it's come up at indie marches that I've been on. People have said, I've signed this, I had my email, I paid a £5 to get a copy of the declaration. Those copies will still be sent, but at the 100,000 completion, at the million mark, sorry. So that £5 was effectively a bit of gas to fund the whole concept and bring about the Long Walk to Freedom, bring about the flyers, the cards, the programme, the agenda. We would have obviously loved to have spoken to more people during the course of that event. It was
right at the beginning of the COVID thing. I mean, it could have been much bigger, but there were, forces beyond our control that prevented it from being a much bigger movement that could have incorporated many more people. So,
Well, I mean, when I talk about my own work on that, I was involved with Independence Live. I'd been speaking to Kevin and Peter, and we were talking about how this walk was going to go around, how we were going to promote this digital blockchain assembly, Digital Covenant, and I was like, well, I'm a live streamer, I'll go along. COVID, I'm home, lost my job a few months ago, so why not? Let's get involved in this. And then it was because I signed up to do the whole 74 days, but I was only going to be doing 500 miles, and I was thinking I'll walk some of the days. As long as I'm there to get a video and do a vlog and let people know in the community where it's happening. Didn't expect I would walk all 74 days and end up doing 1,140 miles all the way around Scotland. And
that must have been lovely.
We did have issues with COVID and changes of bubbles, and towards November, we were getting criticised because we were going through these council regions that we were locked down. We're not supposed to be going through that in that part. So there was lots of nights intense. We kept everything above board. We didn't sneak into people's houses when we weren't supposed to. We had camper vans. It was, as I said, it would have been great if we'd went places and ended up in
circumstances. If COVID hadn't been there, it could have been much different.
Because you look at the 500 walk that happened back in 2018, and they did the 500 miles all the way around Scotland, but they also did rallies, and they went to yes hubs and yes communities and spoke about what and this was the point before you could even sign it. So this was the kind of the foreground for the event in 2020. And we've kind of we just need to work out the way to do it. within my work in the independence movement, I want to work on Plan A through to Z. Now, God forbid I ever see what they've been written down in Plan Z, because that stuff no one wants to see happen or get involved in. But ABC, where we're talking about the political parties, we're talking about the digitized democracies, we're talking about local hubs, local community groups, taking ownership of things like that. There's all sorts of things that we can be doing. We can work out levels of coordinating, creating our own media source, pushing out the BBC so that they're getting less and less airtime. So yeah, as I said, it's not an easy question to answer. There's lots of options, but it can't be my idea, it can't be your idea. It has to be a collective, and we need to work out. And that's why I'm quite excited to see this SSRG roadshow. I'm excited to see lots of things that are going to come about over the you know, we've got the ALBA Party Conference in spring. S1.EP have just had a conference.
And the council elections, what is it, in May, April, May?
Yeah, so we've got council elections coming up in May, and we're talking.
And members of the SSRG are running in. David Henry, who's a member of the SSRG, is running for council in Edinburgh, and it's going to be really interesting. I really think that ALBA being created is really shaking up the scene at the very least, and at the very least, the S1.EP is no longer the only independence party to the extent that the Greens were, but it's going to focus the minds. I mean, we've got the next Westminster election coming up, whenever that may be. Maybe it's sooner than later, but one of the purposes of the convention, that the SSRG is seeking to call in August, is to get the S1.EP MPs and other politicians and ALBA MPs, which we have support of both. Not all, but we have at least 2 or 3. We have definitely both ALBA, at least 3 or maybe 4 S1.EP MPs that are are interested in participating, but just plan it out. Okay, how are we going to do this? How is independence going to be achieved? And then because waiting for a Section 30 order is just complete futility. And if the current S1.EP government waits for a Section 30, what 10 years, 15? How many years before independence? So it's yeah. So let's see. Just getting to some of the questions. Can a petition be set up to recognize Scotland officially in the U.S. as a colony, and as a consequence, go through the decolonization process? We've discussed that in our group. It's a long shot. And it would need to be a last resort, and even then, it's not easy, given the fact, especially that the 5 members of the Security Council, one of them is Britain and one of them is the U.S., and any one of which can veto UN resolutions. So I think technically, yes, that's a possibility, but nothing would be binding. Nothing would be automatically lead to Scottish independence. And the same is true with court cases. There's been, there's the Keating's case and others, and that cost thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of pounds for the legal representation, led to nothing. And as Kenny McCaskill was pointing out when I interviewed him a few weeks ago, it's not going to be through a legal process. It's not like Scotland is just going to win a court decision and be independent like that. It has to be done politically, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so in the time remaining, voting, as you say, social care, and having a digital biometric ID card linked to the blockchain. You could get benefit payments. You could get, you could spend money on, go to the, pay your rent, pay this. You could have a blockchain bank account. You could. There could be, people could contribute to the development of the Constitution, the legal system. So many things. What could you add to that in terms of the way that?
Oh, well, lots. You could put in things like your education record. So you could use it as a verification. This is where I studied. This is where I got my degree. This is my professions. You could include your work history. So I've worked in this industry. I worked with this company. It could be used as a background reference check. You can even host your criminal record on there. and that way central government could use it to vet for people that maybe could be on the sex offenders register automatically. It'll ping up there. So there's all sorts of different layers to it that could become reality, that could be used. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. If we just simply use it as a voting platform at the moment, as a way to have a collective voice, and then use those collective voices to discuss all matter of things. There's true democracy is always held by the people. We appoint our politicians to that level to represent us. They're not doing a very good job of it.
That's the ideal, that the democracy, the people should rule. But in history, it's very rarely been the case. I mean, I think Estonia is a good example of a more democratic system than many others. But I mean, and you had Athenian Greece, where that was the kind of primeval example of democracy, but it was only the white male citizens that participated. For the time, it was very democratic. But and over the years, so. What I find so exciting about this is that, given the opportunity, and if we did construct it well with, blockchain democracy and especially transparency is so important as well, that you can verify how you voted. You can make sure that, whatever the result of the election is accurate. And so that there's this solid foundation. And I agree with you that it should start with, voting, so that, including for, independence, and even after, even if that's not the means that independence is achieved, that it immediately be, that all voting in Scottish elections, referendums, allowing for local referendums, neighborhood referendums, whatever scope the people of that area want to focus on, can be done. And Switzerland is an example where they do have a lot of referendums, and it's nasty. It's or it's not easy. It's contentious.
But Switzerland's a great example because it's you look at the spending budget that they used in the 2014 referendum, and there's question marks whether they went over their money. There's also question marks whether they broke that process. Was it prologue? The 16 weeks before, because the vow was delivered by the Daily Records, given to everyone in all the mainstream media, and that was signed by David Cameron, Nick Clegg, and the other one, Ed Miliband. All of them are gone. So what are their signatures now worth? Everything they promised in that vow was a lie. It was occasionally they'll wheel out Gordon Brown to have a chat with us and tell us that we're too wee, too poor, too stupid. It
was so Westminster nonsense. It was so pathetic, and but the thing is, even around that, I'm so skeptical about the polls. I mean, they're run by.
I remember the reason I was saying Switzerland because they pulled back a recent referendum result. I think it was before COVID, so I'm working on BC time as well all the time. But before COVID, they decided this referendum wasn't legit because the opposition had spent too much money, so they reran it. And so there's all these things that we can. Layers of protection we can put into people, that they're not being missold lies on the side of a bus. They're not being told that they can't afford it, they can't do it, they're too daft. We've got people that sit currently in Holyrood that tell us to this day that Scots are not designed to vote. We're not trained. And they're still elected on that backdoor system that Alba wasn't able to capitalise on because they were too late to the party 6 weeks before a campaign election.
There were legitimate reasons for that, but you're right, and okay, all right. We're coming to the end, but anything you'd like to say to conclude? That you'd like to share your thoughts on, the ways in which we can actually make this a reality.
Eyes on the prize, keep the heat, sign the digital covenant, and let's get Scottish independence done. And thanks to Independence Live for having us. It's been a pleasure. And yourself, Mark, thank you for having us.
The pleasures are. So I'm hoping you I know that you were a little bit nervous before coming on, but I hope that you're not gonna be freaked out by the interview. So okay,
I think the scars will heal. I'll be all right.
All right. So thank you to our listeners. Very much appreciate it. We're working on a lot of fronts here at Independence Live, trying to get independence to come about. And one thing I had neglected for quite some time is the digital covenant and the possibility of digital democracy. And so I very much appreciated that we were able to talk about it and bring it back into the conversation. So when we can hopefully soon have an independent Scotland, this actually can be implemented so that its independence is actually worth it and not Scotland just becoming a mini Westminster. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of our viewers, and we'll see you next week.